This is a daunting task for me. Well, I've lived a lot of years in my life, so that's good to know. But how do I weave together just all the threads of significance in my life that's going to tell my story? And it's a story of being redeemed by a gracious and a loving God in the midst of what would be called chaos in my early life, significant loss in my young adult life, and then stability as I've gotten older. How has God grabbed hold of my life and brought me into relationship with him? I have many memories and moments in my life I can share that evidence God constantly calling me and directing me to him. I'll start at the beginning. Mark and I both grew up in Estacada. We're both lifelong residents of Estacada. I grew up in a small house 3 blocks down the road from the Estacada grade school, which is now Clackamas River Elementary. Growing up in Estacada, I lived in 3 different homes in the Estacada area. My brothers, I had 2 brothers, Mark and Mike, and while we were loved greatly and provided for, it was not the life you would see on Leave It to Beaver or the Brady Bunch. It was far from it. My parents worked hard to provide. Mom waited tables at several of the Estacada restaurants. You might be familiar with them if you're lifelong residents of Estacada. Safari Club, Spar Tree, and Trails End. She worked at all 3. Dad had an assortment of jobs, mainly in construction, but then selling cars. Looking back now, I realize how hard my mom worked to provide and take care of her family, because our house was always clean, and she had 3 young children. It had to be a grind. All of us kids were born. We were all under the age of 2 at one time. Her life was hard. Dad's life was hard. But the hardest part was my mom was a binge drinker, and she struggled with that for most of her life. Her drinking was a problem. It created serious turmoil and dysfunction in our family life. And because of this instability in my young life, I never felt good enough. I wasn't put together like all the other young girls my age. In my mind, I just didn't measure up. And so began my struggle of striving, and more striving. Whew. It wasn't until much later in life that I realized that many families had their own hidden struggles in life. I just was familiar with my own. Estacada had a lot of families that had issues and difficulties, and we just never talked about it. But I'm so grateful for the influence of a grandma who invested in my life. She took me to church. She drove my brothers and I to VBS every summer at the Barton Church. She planted seeds that took root years down the road and are still growing today. I am also confident she offered up many prayers for her wayward grandchildren. Her influence is still felt in my life today. Despite the dysfunction, summers in my young life were awesome. The neighborhood kids, we all got together, played kick the can, hide and seek, monkey in the middle, and any outdoor game you could think of. We'd grab a bat and ball and head to the vacant lot and just played hours of baseball. I also loved to swim, and we would jump off the Bonnie Lure Bridge back when there was water underneath it. We would jump off the Eagle Creek Bridge. So every summer, my time was spent out of doors. By the time I got into the 6th grade, I realized that I was pretty athletic and that I could excel in that area of my life. I never played organized sports growing up. I can't even remember if those were provided for young girls at that time. But when junior high rolled around, I began in earnest to play sports. I loved softball and tennis, but my favorite by far was volleyball. Estacada had a great youth program at the time with an excellent club coach, and so much of my life I have thanked that man. Up until he died, he was a huge factor in my life, and he is why I'm where I'm at today in the volleyball world. Um, so I loved volleyball. I played constantly. I ended up receiving a full ride scholarship to Arizona State University to play volleyball. It was in 1978, and Title IX had recently been put into place. So it couldn't have been better timing for this young athlete from Estacada, Oregon. It was in Arizona that I realized I really needed something more. All of my striving was getting me nowhere. I attended church and was searching, but I wasn't finding any answers. I was lonely and I was homesick. I actually thought about throwing myself in front of a slow-moving car so I could get hurt and go home. That's what I wanted. But unfortunately, that reason surfaced unexpectedly. Mom was diagnosed with lung cancer and was given 6 months to live. I headed home. I badly wanted to share with Mom how she could have peace in the midst of her dying, but I wasn't sure where that peace came from. It was a bad time and a sad time. Mom passed away in May. I do believe she came to know the Lord through the help of a chaplain in the hospital. He shared with my grandma that Penny was at peace and that she had come to trust the Lord before her death. In August, I reported to Portland State University to continue my education and to play volleyball. As I was walking to class in October, I saw a table, Christian Discipleship on Campus. I was curious, what was this about? I signed up for their study and began the process of learning about salvation and what it means to live in relationship to the Lord. My Bible study leader realized that I was pretty vague on what it meant to be a Christian. She showed me that I was separated from God because of my sin. I realized that Christ provided a way for me by his death on the cross. I acknowledged that in prayer and trusted him as my Savior. Finally, I knew what I had been missing. I went to see Mark and told him all about what I had learned. It made sense to him too, and he believed right then and there. It was crazy, my first convert, right there. I'm not sure why it never sank in earlier in my life. I'm confident I had been taught. I know that every week when I was at the Barton Church, I prayed a prayer at the end of the service, but I never understood or grabbed hold of the teaching that Christ died for my sins, and all I needed to do was trust and know that his death on the cross wiped out my sins once and for all. I was so grateful to finally understand what it meant to have a Savior. I was baptized at the Christian church when it was located by the grade school, but shortly after I began attending First Baptist Church, where I have been attending for 38 years. Amazing, huh? I am so grateful for those people in this church who discipled Mark and I. We have been taught by some of the best, but we've also grown together through the years with those same people. I guess you could call Mark and I old-timers. I'm grateful, too, for those who have invested in the lives of our sons, Bryce and Connor. Many poured into our lives and taught us what it means to live our lives for Christ. As a young Christian, I knew I was hungry. I read the Bible, memorized verses, faithfully attended church and Bible studies. I took a speech class at PSU. We had to give approximately 10 speeches, and every one of mine had to do with stories from the Bible, the gospel, or God. I was one of those people. I can't imagine doing that now. Life didn't get any easier, though. 18 months after Mom passed, my brother Mike was in a car accident on River Mill Road. He would live 14 more days, all of that in the ICU. I remember the day we said our goodbyes. My 20-year-old cute, handsome, full of life, and athletic baby brother wasn't going to make it. We had to make the decision to take him off of life support. 3 months later, my dad's dad passed away. Life as a miller had suddenly become very tough. But my faith in God continued. He had called me to himself. He kept pulling me along and made me hungry to know him and share him with others. He had been calling me all of my life and giving me glimpses of him in my mixed-up world. I had been a striver. If you know me well, you'll know that I am a type A creature. I will struggle with those tendencies all of my life. Being a striver and a perfectionist can get exhausting. It's not an easy life and can cause you to pursue things that have no importance. I'm constantly having to refocus and remember those things that are eternal. A verse that has meant much to me in that regard is Psalm 46:10. Cease striving and know that I am God. What a relief. I can just rest in God. He weaves my story. He weaves my loved ones' stories. He directs my path. He knows what's in my future, and I can have peace in his direction for my life. I'm almost done. I'm sure you'll be glad about that. It was at a girls' basketball game while I was watching one of my freshman volleyball athletes that it struck me. I can impact young lives spiritually while also teaching them the game of volleyball, and all while living a simple life in Estacada. With Mark's amazing support, teaching the game of volleyball became my vocation, and I've been at it for 35 years. It's hard to believe, but I coached in Estacada for 25 years, and I'm in my 10th year at Concordia University. I have learned many life and spiritual lessons from competing. They aren't always easy to learn. I can be stubborn and thick-headed. I love to win, and too often I have to be reminded of the things I've learned through the years. I'm hoping to pass those life lessons and some spiritual lessons to my athletes. It's hard. Being an athlete is hard, and being a coach is tough. There are losses, and there are issues of playing time. There is striving for excellence and falling short. The lessons aren't always easy for my athletes or for myself, but God is weaving their stories as well as mine, and for that I am grateful. He is sovereign. He is loving. He has called me, and I am his. Cease striving and know that I am God. Words I've clung to through the years are words that remind me every day that I can rest, and trust in a sovereign God. There we go.